Oh yes, remakes. They can either be memorable pieces of art looking exactly how we pictured them as kids, or they can be a full-on clusterfuck that shits on the original's legacy. Luckily, the Dead Space remake falls under the former. Before I get started, if you plan on going into this game as blindly as possible, then don't watch this until after you've beaten it. Alright, without further delay, let's get started. The game centers around an engineer named Isaac Clarke who, along with his team, board a planet-cracking spaceship called the USG Ishimura as a means of answering a distress signal sent out by the ship's crew. Shortly after getting there, though, they realize the ship is infested with necromorphs, incredibly hostile creatures who look like the Thing's offspring. After escaping a near-death experience, which will be far from the only one he experiences, let's be honest, Isaac must explore the ship, acquire new weapons as a means of standing a better chance at combating the Neckies, and complete a bunch of tasks for other people because they don't have the balls to do it themselves, if he wishes to uncover the truth behind the necromorph's presence. If you're playing Dead Space for the first time, then there are some interesting twists and turns you most likely won't expect. Unlike me, who, for the most part, knew full well what was going to happen on the account of playing the original. Although they spiced it up a little bit by adding in elements within the story that were absent in the original. The biggest being Isaac actually speaks full-on sentences, unlike the original where he is mute for some reason.
It was a trick by a fucking unitologist. Dr. Mercer. He's locked down medical to experiment on the crew.
Personally, I prefer Isaac when he talks, as it makes him feel more like an actual living, breathing person. Since he talks, you get a better understanding of how terrified he is of the whole situation. Because realistically, if you have a whole lot of John Carpenter's brain children running around who are hell-bent on taking the twinkle out of your star, then you'd be pretty vocal about it as well. Even if he talks, he doesn't talk so much until the point where it becomes overbearing. More interestingly, there are several occasions in the remake where Isaac takes his helmet off, so you can actually see the scared shitless dude underneath. I'm aware you saw him without his helmet in the original, but in the remake he is seen without it even more. When you see a character's face who predominantly covers it with something, it's a good thing for the same reason seeing Peter Parker without his mask in Insomniac's Spider-Man is. You realize it's not a monster behind the mask or helmet, it's a man. In Isaac's case, a man who's not some fearless badass agent like Leon Roundhouse Kick Kennedy, who can just face fuck any necromorph he sees with his feet. He's more or less an average Joe who just so happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the regular guy or gal protagonist is something that is seldom seen in video games, making it all the more intriguing when it does happen. They're more believable as characters. And when you see a regular person overcoming dire situations, Isaac included, you end up really admiring them. Aside from Isaac, most of the characters weren't really memorable, as they predominantly sat in the background instead of being present alongside Isaac. I don't mean they should have been by his side the whole time, holding his hand. All I'm saying is it wouldn't have hurt if they had more scenes together in person. At least when it comes to the way certain characters are killed off though, I think their death scenes are much more impactful in the remake than they were in the original. Perhaps not everyone will share this opinion, but I personally thought the voice actors and actresses gave very convincing performances, especially Gunnar Wright, aka Isaac Clarke, who as far as I'm concerned, is irreplaceable as Isaac.
If you've heard Nicole,
I have never shown you anything but courtesy to Dr. Brennan. Can you say the same thing?
I can say I'm not a fucking murderer.
Alright, so Isaac is an interesting character, but how does he control? Really well, actually. I have to apologize for sounding a bit, stuffed. I'm still recovering from a cold, so forgive me. But I couldn't go on any longer without making a video, so fuck it. You're gonna have to deal with it. Isaac's movement is not only good, but he moves exactly how someone would move who is isolated in a dark, creepy-ass ship filled with monsters who can pop out at any given time and give you the kiss of death. But they're not the only ones who can dish out fatal peckings. Which brings me to my next point. The weapons. Every weapon handles very nicely, with improved aiming from the original that feels smoother than my soon-to-be bald head, and includes adaptive trigger functionality, making the already solid gunplay even more enjoyable, as it adds that sweet-ass immersion. Each weapon has a laser pointer much like the one seen for the weapons in Resident Evil 4, thus helping make the aiming feel more precise. Although there are some sections where aiming is a lot harder, like when you're being dragged by one of these tentacles and trying to aim for its weak point so you can escape an instant death. The problem is, Aiming for this weak point is like trying to put a needle in a thread while you're driving a dune buggy over dunes. You can do it, but it's very, very rough. Because Isaac is an engineer, the weapons you acquire throughout the game feel tailored to him. And there is a decent amount of weapon variety, with there being 7 in total. Some people might think it's not a lot, but every weapon also includes an alternate firing mode, essentially meaning you get 2 weapons for the price of 1. You can even unlock special moves for each weapon. You got the plasma cutter, the Dead Space equivalent to a handgun. It has an alternate firing mode that makes the weapon fire horizontally instead of vertically. The weapon in general isn't one of the strongest weapons, being the first weapon you acquire in the game, but you can obviously upgrade its damage, so yeah, it's still pretty useful. The pulse rifle, which is kind of like a machine gun, except it's not, seeing how it's got rifle in the name, as it fires bullets at a much faster rate in its main firing mode. As for its alternate firing mode, it shoots out proximity mines. The Ripper, which, contrary to its namesake, is not a weapon that shoots out farts. Instead, it shoots out saw blades. Its main firing mode shoots out a saw blade but keeps it held in place several feet in front of Isaac, slicing whatever comes into contact with it. The alternate firing mode, on the other hand, shoots the saw blade out like a bullet, although the ones being shot out don't do that much damage. My favorite weapon, and the last one I'll mention so I don't drag this on longer than necessary, is the Force Gun. No, it's got nothing to do with Star Wars. With it, you can either draw enemies in with a gravitational pull, temporarily locking them in place, or shoot a powerful burst of kinetic energy that rips the skin off of neckies and turns them into cheap imitations of Jack Skellington. Not only do the weapons control well, but they also sound really good. If you don't have much ammo left, you can use other means of attacking necromorphs, including melee, although I wouldn't recommend it as it's more used as a last resort, or for killing these sons of bitches. What is much more effective though is using stasis to slow down enemies. This is a huge help considering you'll often be jumped by multiple necromorphs at once. The only downside being, stasis, much like your guns, only has so much usage before it needs refilling. As luck would have it, there are plenty of areas around the ship that refill it free of charge. You can also use the kinesis module, and with the kinesis module, pick up and throw sharp objects, including the severed appendages of necromorphs, at other necromorphs who are running towards you and don't know the meaning of personal space, thereby nailing them into the wall like a sticky note on a corkboard and ultimately teaching them a valuable lesson in social distancing. Impaling enemies is honestly one of the most pleasurable things you can do in the game. And hey, if there's nothing sharp to stab a bitch with, then you can make a bitch go boom with explosives. Like the original, the equipment menu is a holographic display, meaning everything you equip or unequip is in-game. I prefer this approach, seeing how it makes the game feel more. I know I already said this word, but fuck it, here it comes again. Immersive. Although the one downside is, it does leave yourself open to potentially being attacked as you are equipping or unequipping weapons. And you'll be doing this a lot, as you can only equip 4 weapons at a time, and will run out of ammo for one gun, but have a ton for a gun you don't even yet have equipped. The shop is also like the equipment menu, as it's in-game as well. Here, you can buy things like ammo, which is great and all, but feels kind of unnecessary, seeing how you find a shit ton of ammo in the environment, or by killing enemies. You can also purchase weapon and suit upgrades. You can even sell things for money, just in case you're broke like me. True story. All in all, the shop is good. But it is missing one crucial element, a merchant. The remake stays faithful to the original while adding in additional features that don't feel tacked on, and even improves upon the OG in other aspects, not only the gunplay. For example, exploration in the remake is handled way better than in the original, as this time around you can return to previous areas anytime you like. Chapters are still very much a thing in this game, but they seamlessly transition between one another, making the ship feel as if it is this one giant interconnected place like it's supposed to, whereas in the original, the Ishimura felt like a series of levels. You still use the tram as a means of fast travel, but it's no longer the loading screen once seen in the original. Plus, it's fairly fast. Speaking of fast, also when you boot up the game, it starts up super quick, courtesy of current-gen console power. As a result of the ship being one giant interconnected level, it honestly ends up feeling like a Metroidvania. You acquire certain things in order to access previously inaccessible areas, like getting higher clearance so you can enter rooms you couldn't beforehand. And exploration does reward you very generously, as you'll find a ton of ammo, credits, aka space money, semiconductors that can be sold for sizable amounts of cheddar, super white, audio vlogs left by the most certainly dead crew members, suit upgrades which not only increase your inventory space, but also reduce the damage you take. And, of course, power nodes. These are used for things like upgrading your health rig, the amount of oxygen you have in the vacuum of space that's dead, the reach of your kinesis module, the length of stasis when it's used on enemies, and traits for your weapons. You can even find blueprints that allow further upgrading for every weapon tree, and in doing so, include those special moves for each weapon I mentioned earlier. Another much appreciated change made for this remake is making the god-awful cannon firing segment from the original much easier. Oh, anyone who played the original, you know the pain. Whether you're tracking a main or side objective, getting lost and wandering around the ship like a piss-poor sighted mole will never be a concern, thanks to Isaac's gauntlet producing a beacon of light that pinpoints you towards your objective. As previously stated, and unlike the original, the remake does feature side quests. They aren't obviously as compelling as the main narrative, but they still have their own stories that are interesting and add more depth into the game's lore. But Jesse, how can you tell whether or not you're tracking a main or side objective? What an excellent question. Can I be any more patronizing? The beacon is blue for main objectives, while it turns yellow for side objectives. Simple. One of the funnest pieces of side content for me is Zero-G basketball. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. While on the subject of Zero-G sections, the controls, much like the ones for the gunplay, feel a lot smoother than they did in the original. Although I think it's kind of a bummer they got rid of the Zero-G jump, considering it helped you dodge a lot more efficiently, whereas in the remake you were more liable to be hit by one of those human-scorpion hybrids.
Can't catch me. Ooh! Fucking hell, I was wrong.
Some of the Zero-G sections in general felt cumbersome, like the ones where you're in the vacuum of space and are being shat on by necromorph projectiles, wondering where in the actual vastness of space having fuck did it come from, while also worrying about oxygen. One thing I don't really care for are the puzzles. For the most part, I hate puzzles, except if they are executed like the ones in Zelda dungeons, because at least the ones in Zelda games are actually fun. The puzzles in this game, on the other hand, for the most part anyway, are not fun at all. As a matter of fact, some of them are a righteous pain in the ass to solve, or at least they would have been hadn't I relied on my most reliable friend, the internet. Upon completing the game for the first time, you unlock New Game Plus. Surprisingly enough, this game had it since launch. Unlike a lot of other modern games, when completing the game for the first time, you unlock an additional suit, along with other goodies. There's even an alternate ending you can view when you complete your New Game Plus playthrough. Shifting the topic towards technical aspects, I only ever play games in the performance mode on my PS5, seeing how I prefer a higher frame rate over higher resolution, with this one being no exception. In performance mode, aside from a few hiccups, the game does run really well. As for how it looks, well, obviously the biggest change from the original are the graphics. In the graphical sense, and every other one if I'll be completely frank, the game is vastly superior to the original. Whether it's the detail seen in the facial models or on Isaac's suit, the wet look of enemies and certain environments, particle effects and lighting, the way the blood of your enemies reacts when in Zero-G environments. I love how the more you shoot a necromorph, the more flesh and bone is either exposed or flat out torn off from their bodies. This adds a sense of realism. Yes, that's a good thing. by the way. And the gore is very detailed. I mean, you can see the entrails of this necromorph. Nasty. Speaking of gore, the death animations. Gonna be honest, I didn't die too many times in this game as I played on normal mode, so I didn't see all the ways you can get deaded. But I did watch them on YouTube. Much like the rest of the gore seen in the game, they are very detailed, but they aren't nearly as good as the ones seen in other horror games, like the Callisto Protocol. I'm not saying the Callisto Protocol is a better game. Dead Space is vastly better. I'm simply stating the game has better death animations than the ones in the Dead Space remake. But aside from that, the game truly is a visual treat. As I mentioned in my Resident Evil 4 review, there are 3 key pillars that make a horror game feel like a horror game. The first pillar being enemies. I really like the story behind the necromorphs as it has this very ancient Lovecraftian vibe to it. The best thing about the necromorphs is everyone has such an iconic appearance and looks unlike any run-of-the-mill infected humans seen before, as their disfigured, grotesque, mutated, downright terrifying designs are on a whole other level, baby. Even the franchise's most common enemy type, the slasher, looks so distinct from regular zombified enemies in other games, as they have these large bone blade arms and walk kinda like a T-Rex. The hulking necromorphs known as brutes are like humanoid gorilla hybrids on steroids. The most terrifying enemy for me personally is the Twitcher, a slasher variant that moves like they've had one too many cups of coffee and can close a distance between you and them in such a short period of time. As such, they make you shit yourself at supersonic speeds. For the most part, I did enjoy fighting all the different kinds of necromorphs, keywords being for the most part. My least favorite necromorphs to fight, on the other hand, are these gelatinous, cellulite-filled, gum-stuck-on-the-wall looking jackasses called Guardians. Not only is killing them like pulling out a tooth without a numbing agent, but they keep shooting out these little baby guardians from their belly-ginas by the assload, who you are unwillingly contending with while also trying to kill Mama Thickums. A guardian's weak points are their tentacles. Even if you destroy the tentacles, they regrow their tentacles back several more times, making them an even bigger pain in the booty hole than they already were in the first place. I'm sure you're probably wondering, Jesse, why don't you just walk past them? Because a lot of the time, they block the route you need to take. And if you try squeezing past them while they're still alive, they'll show you them tentacles. Not only do the necromorphs have iconic appearances, but the traditional dome shot doesn't cut it. Pun intended. As the only sure way you can kill necromorphs is by either cutting off their limbs or shooting their glowing, definitely not weak points. Essentially, every necromorph requires a different strategy to defeat. It's worth noting, shooting off an enemy's limbs and watching them crawl towards you like an ant whose legs were ripped off by a sadistic child leaves this very satisfying feeling in my blackened heart. Sometimes necromorphs will even play dead, meaning they are fairly smart. Quite frankly, I think it's pretty freaking neat. As in most other games, horror ones included, when an enemy looks dead, it's because they are.
Ha! Nice try. What? What?
Upon killing a necromorph, you can stomp on their corpses. This is not only gratifying, but it will also give you ammo drops or credits. The game does have a couple of boss necromorphs, but they are, for the most part, underwhelming fights, although the final boss is actually pretty decent. The second pillar is the environments. The atmosphere within the Ishimura is impeccable. The environments are faithfully recreated while also adding additional bells and whistles. Take this room for example. In the original, it's pretty bland looking. In the remake, it has this large collection of fleshy mass. Every corridor of the Ishimura in general is highly detailed and knows exactly how much lighting or darkness it should have. There are varied sections within the ship, such as the greenhouse sector, or this area being my particular favorite on an aesthetic standpoint, looking absolutely disgusting, as it's comprised entirely of human bodies. Some areas even have this really neat fog-like effect that makes the already creepy atmosphere even scarier. All the areas within the ship are unsettling, but for all the right reasons, as you have no idea when and where the necromorphs will pop out next. But the environment's unsettling nature doesn't deduct from how fun exploring is. As a matter of fact, the fear adds to it.
Fucking hell.
The final pillar is the sound. While the enemies and environments add towards the horror element, I said horror, not whore, Those aren't the only contributing factors towards making a game scary. It needs to sound scary as well. Dead Space does a really good job at fucking with you in that regard. You're just strolling along the ship when suddenly this eardrum-destroying pipe bursts.
Yeah.
You can hear necromorphs moving around the ship and are fully expecting to be jumped by one, or even several, at any given moment, only to realize you were deceived. The bad shit is about to happen music will suddenly start up and have you panicking as you look around for what triggered it in the first place. The sounds of the necromorphs themselves are really disturbing, as they produce these monstrous noises that are a mix of gurgling, wailing, and agony, combined with one too many tablespoons of demonic. The unsettling whispering you also hear in the background as a result of Isaac hallucinating. Ugh, like whispering's supposed to be sexy in some cases, but in this case it's like, no. Get out of here. This makes the horror element within the game not just physical, but psychological as well. Safe to say this game is scary all around. So much so, in fact, it had an ass load of creepy moments that made my butthole clench tighter than security at Fort Knox.
Oh my god, he's running fast. Jesus Christ. Stop running. Stop it! I don't like it.
I'm sure there are edgelords out there who claim the game isn't scary, when in reality, upon playing it for themselves, they probably shit their pants in dread before Isaac even stepped foot on the Ishimura. Dead Space is easily one of the best remakes ever made, and it has me really excited for a potential remake of Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3, the latter of which totally needs a remake because I heard that it's like to the Dead Space franchise what Hawkeye is to the Avengers. It's fucking useless and makes the others look bad. Thanks for watching.